Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this Wheeler Centre event, Islands in the Stream. My name is Brodie Lancaster and I'm going to be hosting our chat today. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on stolen, unceded Aboriginal land. Personally, I'm speaking today from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and our panellists are based in other parts of the country, so I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which you're all joining us today, and the traditional custodians of the lands that this conversation reaches, virtually and in person. We're here today to talk about streaming, what it offers to audiences, creators, the film and television industries, and of course the streaming services themselves. Here to discuss with me is a brilliant panel. Enoch Mailangi is the creator and writer of All My Friends Are Racist, which premiered on ABC iView in September, and they've just wrapped their debut short film with Noble Savage Pictures. Michael Sun is a culture critic, host of Guardian Australia's Saved for Later podcast, and the former culture editor of Netflix Australia New Zealand. And Ben Nguyen is the director of programming within Australian streaming service Stan's content team. Thanks everybody for joining me today. Ben, I'm going to start with you because you're kind of our gateway behind the scenes of our screens. I didn't intend for that to rhyme. Streaming services we know they tailor not just their algorithms, but also their content to what people want to watch and how we consume shows and films now. Can you give us any insights to begin with into what audience viewing habits are like broadly and what streaming services like Stan and the other big players are tapping into behaviourally in the way that they kind of serve us content?
Well, firstly, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm on Garigal land, beautiful Garigal land. I mean, obviously the pandemic's had a huge impact, I know all streaming services have seen a huge spike in viewing every time people get stuck in lockdowns. And I guess, there's something that's always very interesting to me about how we consume TV. And I think that we're all still hungry for that very communal experience of kind of all sitting around the television in the living room and kind of knowing that like the rest of the country is watching the same thing at the same time. And that doesn't happen anymore with streaming, but we kind of make it happen in some ways. We sort of listen out for what everyone else is watching, and when everyone else is talking about Squid Game, then we jump on Squid Game and kind of create this moment together. So I think that there's some things that are very deeply instilled in the way that we consume TV, and then I think we're just trying to navigate the fact that firstly we sort of have to start paying for it, and secondly we have to kind of figure out what's right for me and what's right for what's going to make me part of this bigger community and culture that I want to be present in.
Michael and Enoch, does that kind of reflect what you're looking for in not just what you watch, but what you want the people around you to be watching? Are you looking for that communal kind of shared experience?
Yeah, and I think it's like a really cheesy thing to say, but I think the obvious answer is of course that during lockdowns especially, like I think a lot of the tentpole TV shows which have come out over the past even just like 6 months have almost been this very grounding experience. Being able to like watch an episode of The White Lotus and then immediately scroll through Twitter for 3 hours is personally my community. But I think in that sense as well, like it almost feels anecdotally at least like that's something that had not occurred in such massive proportion for a little while. It feels like it definitely came back with a vengeance last year, and especially this year. I think there have just been so many TV shows made and so much discourse around it that it has felt really, it's felt nice to tap into like some kind of communal level of no matter how brainwormed.
Enoch, what about you? What was like the last show that you watched that you kind of either heard about everyone else talking about, or you watched and you were like, I need my friends to also be watching this so I can talk about it?
I think the last one was Succession, which I just like love for some reason. But I'm also one of those viewers who enjoy talking about the show more than I enjoy watching it. Like I think fundamentally, like I always a part of being a part of this like sort of global audience is being able to partake in conversations and seeing what these sort of discourses are born out of media. But I don't know. I'm not sure whether that's because I love TV and film and work in it, or that's an experience for everyone. I couldn't be the judge of that.
Lockdown really has kind of amplified it in such a real way. And I'm just realizing now I'm in a group chat where we talk about The Bachelor and Bachelorette. And when the most recent season started airing, the group chat was firing, like hundreds of messages. And then we came out of lockdown a few days later and it immediately turned to like, I'm going to catch up another time, or I'm going to watch it back this weekend and catch up on 3 or 4 episodes. And so lockdown has really created these little like hermits all sharing the same experience as well. The big behavior as far as streaming TV in particular goes is binging. And it's kind of hard to imagine that before like 2013, like it was so recent that Netflix started dropping House of Cards and then series like Orange is the New Black, their original content in one go. And there was the expectation. It reminds me of when I was a kid and I'd have to read the new Harry Potter book all weekend because if you went to school on Monday, it'd get spoiled. You have to kind of consume everything as soon as it comes out. And streamers are meeting audience demand by releasing content that way. I'm curious to know if that is how you would choose to watch new shows, if there wasn't that kind of FOMO involved, and also if it's how you like to watch new series.
Really dependent on the genre and like how long it is. If it's like a short comedy, I'll usually binge the whole thing. But if it's like a sort of 1 hour prestige drama like Succession, I'm not like spending 10 hours or like, because it's in season 3, 20 hours watching it. Yeah, I could do it, but I think that is probably sad. Like it feels a bit locked down. Energy. I have 20 hours to spare. So yeah, I think it just depends on what it is and how bingeable the story is, right?
I'm finding it annoying at the moment that I've got too many weekly shows on the go, and that's frustrating me that I want to watch more, and that at least I want to have a balance of like some weekly and some binges all at the one time. But I think that there is an element of how do we want to allow viewers to make their own decision about how they want to watch something. And I think at Stan, whenever we've done original content, so the content that we actually have control over, we wanted to release that all at once because then the audience can decide how they want to consume it. But I think that it is interesting. There is, I think, a trend back to this weekly viewing, and part of that is, like I was talking about, trying to create some of that sort of communal kind of water cooler conversation, but albeit on like WhatsApp chats and social media and Twitter, and I think that when you have like a really kind of big property, and there's I think like WandaVision was an example earlier in the year where everyone had different theories about where it was going to go next, and it allowed people to have that speculation together. Some shows that are very dense and kind of multiple subplots and a lot of characters are much better suited to a binge viewing, because by the time a week has passed, I've kind of forgotten the plot threads from a week ago. So I think that I think it does depend on the content.
This is such like a fence-sitting answer from me, but I feel like my ultimate preference is an extreme happy medium where I watch one episode per day until I finish the show, which I feel like I often can't do because I have such low amounts of self-control. Like when Hacks dropped on Stan, then I was literally like, I was telling myself, I was like, I'm going to do one episode every day or every 2 days. And then it was just like one evening gone. It was not possible to control, which I feel like I'm like, if I had any degree of human levels of self-control, I would definitely prefer to watch it episodically, because I think like you're correct in saying that it does create more of that communal feeling and it creates more excitement. But at the same time, I don't think I can wait like a week between episodes, especially I think in lockdown when, as I said, it was like the White Lotus, it was Gossip Girl season. It felt like we were just like suckling at the teat of HBO Max, and every week just like nothing would come, and I was like, please, 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 like we can't wait a week, especially in lockdown when every week felt like a year. I think that was incredibly painful. So I think maybe like for that reason, I am leaning more towards the side of a streaming service dropping an entire season in one go and letting people choose how they want to watch that. But of course, I understand like the marketing and the actual like attention aspect behind why they would be dropping episodically.
There's also like the machine behind the week to week, right? There's the recaps, the written recaps, there's the podcast recaps, there's the, you know, the Twitter conversation, and like you guys said, the kind of hypothesizing about what's going to happen next. A show like Mayor of Easttown really captured that, where every week I think Vulture was running a story of like, okay, now who do we think is the killer after this week's batch of episodes? Enoch, your series, All My Friends Are Racist, it was all released in one go, is that right?
Yeah.
Did knowing that that the viewing experience would be kind of someone sitting down and watching the entire series at once, did that, or how did that affect the way that you structured and wrote the show?
Yeah, it was sort of written and shot like a movie, and then it was segmented into episodes. But I think it was always pitched as like a show to binge. It was short. It was supposed to, like, I would never understand if somebody watched Amphor episodically over 5 weeks. I think that's insane. From a screenwriter's perspective, like the word economy was really fraught. So it was like having to introduce like a whole world in, I guess, like a 12 to 15 minute episode is like actually really intense, which is why at times when it comes to, I guess, short format, I find it really hard to watch because they're so often small world due to heaps of different reasons. A lot of it seems to be budgetary, at least in Australia. But yeah, those are things that was really hard, and but we obviously worked through it with like Cody and Bjorn. How do we, even though having to cut multiple characters, how do we sort of keep the authenticity, or I guess what we thought made the world special? But yeah.
As I was preparing for today, I was thinking a lot about like the structure of like a binged show and the experience of watching it. For me, as someone who does not create TV, and you know, when full series started dropping on like a Netflix, for example, it seemed to be that creators really liked the freedom they had to just go, we've got as much time as we want. We don't have ad breaks to factor in. We can let scenes play out. We know that people are likely going to just roll into the next episode. And it made me furious about the Gilmore Girls reboot, A Year in the Life. I'm not sure if you're all familiar, but what was a tightly written show around commercial breaks for TV became this kind of, you know, hour-long. It seemed really indulgent at times, the way that scenes and storylines dragged out. And that was just my way of venting about that still 5 years later. But to get to the question is, I'm wondering if you think we, you know, do we lose something in the content when the form is so free and open as it can be on streaming?
Well, I think it's interesting that you actually mentioned Netflix, because I think Netflix is actually quite notorious, if you will, for offering very talented and great creators extremely high budgets and also very large swaths of freedom that then lead to these pieces of content that could feel indulgent. So I think as much as it has to do with the fact that, you know, the actual form has changed, as you said, there are no ad breaks, it's a different viewing experience entirely. I think it also is the way that streaming services approach directors and creators is quite different from the way that traditional like commercial TV has worked with creators, where there's so much more freedom for the directors, which is so good in some parts, but then it leads to these potentially overdrawn, overlong films and TV shows that, you know, like to be perfectly honest, probably need a bit of editing and probably need a bit more oversight in the first place. Like there are definitely people I can think of right now who I'm like, please just, you know, trim and edit and please actually receive some editorial feedback. Ryan Murphy. I think that's all I have to say about that.
I'm sure something is both gained and lost. I think, you know, there's obviously a real discipline to making something for, you know, network TV and kind of as broad a possible audience, and you're sort of restrained to this sort of tight episode structure. And I'm thinking of like Robert and Michelle King, who made The Good Wife for CBS and then The Good Fight for a streaming service. And they're kind of both very different beasts. I think I loved The Good Wife and how, you know, disciplined and economic that storytelling was. And The Good Fight then has allowed them in that same world to kind of go in a much more absurd, satirical direction. And sometimes, you know, I think certainly they've kind of overreached and it's stepped into a bit of self-indulgence, but then, you know, they've managed to pull that back. And then they also made a show, Evil, and the first season was for network and the second season was for streaming. And again, like there's sort of these kind of flights of fancy going on in the streaming version that you would never get on a network. And occasionally that overreaches, but I guess it's just means that people are kind of taking bigger swings, and then sometimes they're going to hit and sometimes they're going to miss.
I think the binging versus appointment TV, like it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like a creative sort of led conversation anyway. So it feels like it's done by upper execs, and I don't really get the logic, because I think a big part of why everybody signed up for streaming services was the idea that you could binge everything. So I'm just yet to meet any creative who is like team appointment, or like showrunners who are like, yeah, like we want to do a weekly appointment show, and that's built into the creative and in the writing room stuff. But I don't know. I
guess, yeah, like that makes me think that the act of watching a whole series at once isn't new. Like I'm thinking of, I used to work at Sanity, shout out, in like the, you know, mid 2000s, and, you know, Sopranos box sets, and I had all the OC box sets because I wanted to watch every episode whenever I wanted to watch them. And so that on demand, or the kind of rolling through all the episodes at once, isn't new. It's more just the idea that everyone could be watching everything all at one time, and there's no ad breaks and stuff to cut around.
Oh, well, sometimes too, I think we forget that streaming is itself a bit of a throwback. Like we kind of think of it as this brand new thing, but actually, you know, when Netflix were creating a website to go along with their mail order DVD business, like it's pretty much modeled on the video store. And I kind of just have, you know, such a similar experience to when I was growing up, and you'd like stock up on weeklies, and sometimes the thing that you wanted to watch wasn't there and you had to pick something else. You know, that just that the way that the tiles are kind of placed on a shelf, like it's trying to recreate that experience.
That's so funny you mentioned that. I was listening to a podcast recently where John Early, who is in the show Search Party and has made like a web series for Vimeo, he was talking about this kind of very fond memory he had as a kid of every Friday night when his mum went and did the grocery shop, she would drop him at the video store beforehand, and so he would pick what he was going to watch for his week. You know, he was an indoor kid and he was picking what he was going to watch on the weekend. And he said, you know, because I spent all that time and spent the money renting VHS tapes, whatever it was, I was just stuck with for the weekend. So even if it wasn't great, I still watched it because I didn't have this just like unlimited choice of everything else as well. And yeah, I completely forgot until now that Netflix used to send compact discs in the mail. Yeah, long before it came to Australia. I remember being very jealous of Americans getting to do that. The other thing that came to my mind when I thought about the way like a binged show is structured was The Handmaid's Tale. And I remember when it was first adapted for Hulu, a lot was kind of made about the fact that the episodes would be really intense and like draining to watch and quite brutal. But they, for the most part, ended with these really upbeat, kind of sometimes jarringly upbeat rock songs, and you know, you'd watch the most brutal action on screen and then you'd be hearing like a Bruce Springsteen song or something. And I remember reading at the time that it was done to, down the line, once the series was finished, encourage binging, because they figured if someone's sitting down and watching this like dark drama, they might not be inclined to roll into the next episode, but that's how Hulu kind of saw the future of the show. And I'm wondering, is that common kind of for shows to keep us ready to roll into like an endless run of episodes? Like Ben, does that ever factor in when you're commissioning? Or Enoch, do you think of like the way one episode ends, we have to kind of keep someone coming back for the next one? You have to write in like a high note or a cliffhanger or something classic like that?
I think that yeah, I mean, I'd be interested what Enoch thinks, but I think the writing has changed, and you know, the structure has changed. So it is much more about the cliffhanger and getting you into the next episode, rather than sort of the old-fashioned kind of closed ending, kind of everything kind of returns back to how it was before, that you would get with like a sitcom or a procedural drama. So I think sort of I think that probably is reflected in the kinds of genres that are being commissioned by streamers as well. But yeah, interested in what Enoch thinks.
You sort of speak about it in writing rooms all the time, whether like the episode has a hook at the end that brings the audience back. But I think that's also good storytelling. Like if I'm watching a whole pilot and then I get to the end and I'm sort of like, is that it? I think everybody sort of enjoys a good twist at the end of a pilot to keep them watching, and then several more hooks to keep them watching. But I think it has changed the way, like, I guess young screenwriters are emerging and being more aware of like streaming platform structures in terms of like how a half an hour is supposed to sit, and what are the sort of rules to get your script read and get it across the line. I think that's just like the culture of TV. It's like regulated around structure and rules, and I don't know. Is that right, Ben? He's probably got way more experience than.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think you're totally right, but it's interesting that it's applying to documentary as well. I think that's quite a big shift, that, you know, documentary was much more kind of self-contained, and you know, probably, you know, like a feature documentary, 90-minute was kind of the longest form of documentary storytelling. But now documentaries are totally taking that rhythm from serialized drama and trying to kind of hook you over multiple episodes.
With docos, sorry, it feels like with docos specifically, like they're almost taking their beats from podcasts as well, because I feel like a lot of the docos that I would think about doing this, it's like true crime docos, and like docos which like unravel some kind of, even if it's not true crime, it's like unraveling some kind of like mystery over like a season long, which feels like it's emulating, as much as it is like fictional TV shows, it's also emulating like the rise of podcasts, and like stuff like Serial especially, I feel, was like a real like innovator in that kind of area of like very hooky documentary style content. But I also kind of question, just in general, whether this idea of like the hook is not new to streaming, obviously. And I also think that it's something that's been, even if it wasn't traditionally used in like comedy series or lighter series, for example, I think it's always been used in TV in general. Like I remember watching Heroes when I was like age 10, and just like not being able to stop binging, because that was like a classic example of like a show where every single episode had like a massive cliffhanger, to the extent where they had to like jump the shark to even create a cliffhanger at all. But I feel like it's this idea of having a cliffhanger is something that's always been in TV.
Well, it probably kicked off in the soap opera, really, but then I think you would see it like in the 90s, like a show like Friends, which pretty much had self-contained episodes, but then they always had to end the season with some kind of, Ross and Rachel cliffhanger. So it's, yeah, you're right. It's an old technique.
And that idea of like, searching for the cliffhanger or needing the cliffhanger on like a hero's, it's the complete opposite. But I recently tried to watch This Is Us, and it's so unbingeable because every episode is designed to make you like a heaving, crying mess. And so even though even though I knew it's kind of like an emotionally wrenching show, I still kind of tried to watch like 3 episodes in a row, and it would just destroy. I feel like I needed a sleep after every episode, which is probably why it works like, at like 8 or 9 p.m. on a classic like free-to-air situation. As consumers, I would like to know, Michael, maybe we'll start with you, because your job is kind of to keep up with everything that's happening in this environment. But as a consumer, as well as a critic, do you feel a pressure to watch everything when it's released, to know what's going to be big in like the conversation online? And are you making choices of what to watch based on what you personally are interested in, or what you think is going to be big in, the culture?
Yeah, 100%. I think there is, like, you're absolutely right. There is a non-stop pressure to keep up with the discourse at all times. And like, I think it's a pressure that many, if not like most, all people like working in the media, even I'm sure like Enoch and Ben, you would also experience this too, like having to always be across everything and anything, and then also having to like predict which things are going to be big, and then feeling like a flop when your prediction is not correct. Um, but I think it like there definitely is this. Sometimes it almost feels like a burden where I know that I'll be watching a TV show just because I have to watch it, not because I actually am enjoying it. And I think my toxic trait is that I am finding it like harder and harder to actually watch content for enjoyment anymore. And the fact that I just call it content speaks volumes. But I feel like I often do find myself falling into these like really bad cycles of thought where even if I'm watching a show that I love, so like recently I was watching like The Other Two, for example, which is like one of my favorite shows. Even watching that show, I kept thinking about like what I could pitch and what I could write and what it's like giving to us. And I'm like, why am I thinking like this? And it feels like it feels like I'm almost like quantitatively analyzing it in a way that is not conducive to enjoying the show at all. So I definitely feel like as a writer, such as a critic, like such even as someone in the media, it is important, though I have not quite learned this myself, to create that kind of like personal professional separation. And that is something that I need to get better at, I think. But Ben, I can't imagine what it must be like for you, as well, having to you must encounter so much content, and then you're actually deciding whether or not it should come on Stan.
Yeah, well, I think you sort of working for a broadcaster or a streamer, and I think this is probably just true of so many of us that work kind of around this industry, is you just do become a bit of a professional grazer where you're just having this sort of constant tasting plate of different of what's new, so that you kind of can keep up with the conversation. But I think there's been all the discussion about the golden age of television and prestige television and peak TV, and that really was just focused just on the US. I think the US is sort of suddenly now opening its eyes to actually you could never keep up with all the TV that was being made, because it's being made all around the world, not just in the US. And I think so. I have sort of read some of that idea that is television turning more into books, where no one would expect to have read every single book that gets published, and it's okay to kind of just find something that is meaningful to you, and not everyone has to have also been reading it at the same time. So there probably is like some kind of balance there between the way that we kind of find our own little meaningful pockets of TV shows that resonate with us, versus kind of actually having to keep up constantly with the zeitgeist.
Enoch, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think like a big part of being gay is ensuring that like your fingers on every pulse. You don't want to be like, the girl at the party who doesn't know what everyone's talking about. But I also think like that's probably more linked to my queerness in relationship to like what I consume. A big part of like who I am, or who people are, is what they consume. So yeah, like there is a pressure, but I think that pressure is alleviated by the good story. So if it's good, it's worth it. But the pressure's only there when you're watching like so much crap, right, Michael? Like, do you feel more pressure when it's like I've got 10 shows before me and like none of them are good?
And I only have one photo in my hand. I feel like what you said about like the connection between queerness and consumption is so funny to me because it's like, yeah, I think like the state of being like the state of being queer is that what you consume is what you are, and I sometimes wonder whether like I'd be happier if we just treated like if in my own mind I just treated viewing and consumption as like almost like water cooler chat as opposed to this like identity defining existential crisis all the time. But I guess unfortunately that is just what an existence we're doomed to.
Yeah, like 50 years ago, they would have been like reading poetry. I just think for me, it's like TV and film because I don't really like reading poetry.
Yeah. And it also, like what you're saying just then about queerness and like taste making is very apt, I think. Like,
It's the taste making, and the biggest taste makers are like the 16 to 20-year-old queers, like that age bracket. We sleep on them.
especially, having an Instagram, I'm thinking of someone like Evan Ross Katz has like a very big following online, and the things that he posts are kind of, they're not always, it's not always queer content, but it's a Sarah Michelle Gellar or it's a Tilda Swinton. It's kind of like divas or like women who have queer people have an attachment to, but then also are housewives, and also like this content that speaks to kind of, I don't know, that audience. I watch a lot of Real Housewives and reality TV, and every single podcast I listen to is hosted by like two queer men.
It is so sad that I get so much of my culture news, not so much, but I get more than I would like to from people sharing Evan Ross Katz's posts onto their Instagram stories.
It's curation.
You think Erica Jane knew?
I think that Erica Jane, I think she knew something. Yeah.
Okay, I agree.
Yeah. I also think that she's not sorry. Like she's the victim in her eyes. This is Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. I could chuck this away and we can talk about this for the next 25 minutes. But Ben, you brought up the golden age of prestige TV, which is these conversations always come back to the archetypal kind of like troubled, usually straight white male protagonist. It's a Don Draper, it's a Tony Soprano, it's a Walter White. I only just recently did my first Sopranos watch, so now I kind of know what I'm talking about when I talk about this as well. I'm curious to know, in a streaming environment, is prestige TV possible, or does everything kind of have a shorter shelf life to the point where it can't become like a big cultural moment in the same way?
I mean, it's a tricky one. I think that well, sort of premium cable channels like HBO obviously have had such an influence in how we even just think about TV, and some of those titles that you mentioned, and a lot of those were either made by HBO or made by HBO's competitors trying to kind of play in that space. And I think that like when I look at our original slate, I don't think we really have a show like that. I think our shows are kind of, there's a much kind of greater mix, and there's a move away from those kinds of sort of anti-hero dramas. But I think that there's sort of still, I guess there's still a little bit of that kind of, badge of what does it mean to be premium? What does it, and actually kind of, I think there's still a little bit of this binary between, well, free TV is mainly reality, and then drama is what you pay for, and you have to be doing something kind of a little bit sort of special, and I mean, I think at Stan, we do try and think about, well, let's kind of play in all those genres that exist, but then what can we do that we haven't seen before with those? And I think sort of that's probably the marker of premium in my eyes, in the terms that you're sort of just trying to kind of push the envelope a little bit, but will it be a big awards show favorite, water cooler moment? That's much more difficult to kind of predict.
Michael, how does that kind of play into the things that you choose to cover? Because I know as like a freelance writer, if I don't have a take on a show when it either first airs or when it ends, the time limit on having an opinion is very short now. Whereas, I feel like an essay on The Sopranos is timeless.
I feel like personally, I think there are huge gaps in my viewing knowledge, and The Sopranos is one of them. And I feel like a lot of the kind of 2010s prestige TV, I've kind of felt turned off by, for lack of a better word. So to me, it almost feels like we're finally moving into an era where we've moved away from like the Don Drapers and the Walter Whites of the world, in a very positive way. And I don't think I'm talking about that just in terms of like diversity and representation. I think I'm very much talking about it in terms of like narrative as well, where I think TV right now to me is defined by petty dramas. I mean, like the fact that Succession is like the biggest show almost in the world right now, I think really speaks to that idea that all we really want is like gossip filtered through the lens of awful people. And I think that plays very well into my strengths of gossiping and being interested in gossip. So I'm very happy that these are the shows that are being talked about right now. And I think to your point, Brodie, on like the actual shelf life of opinions and takes, I think that to me is why I view quite favorably this idea of episodic TV and the return to episodic TV, even on streaming services, because like as someone who is slaving away at the content mines, it just means that there is like there are more opportunities, there are ample opportunities for actually having takes week after week. And like, even if you miss 3 weeks of a show, you can still have like an opinion on the 4th episode, as opposed to the idea that there is that kind of pressure on critics and writers to have to binge an entire series in a week, or like binge like a screener before the season even drops to have like a fully formed opinion. I think that's why I'm pretty okay with episodes.
Yeah. Enoch, I'm curious to know, like, that conversation around prestige or the golden age of TV. Like, what is your relationship to those shows, and are there like shows or creators maybe who you think are like left out of that canon or conversation?
Yeah, I think like prestige TV is often misrepresented as maybe being about, I guess, like how high budget it is. It's like cinema made for like the everyday cultural middle class, in the way that it's like it gives them things to talk about and unpack and dissect. But I think like the really good parts of prestige TV that I think, and it's my reason to think that it's not going away and it should never go away, is that like it's built around like a lead authored creative. And we saw that like research with Michaela Cole's I May Destroy You and Chewing Gum, what like Mike White's White Lotus, which was like, I guess, sort of critiqued for being white. But I think what fundamentally was really great about those two examples is that it had like an authored voice at the forefront, and you could feel that throughout the show, and that's what made it special. And I don't think like, I think sort of, even though like Tony Soprano is like a story about. I think, I don't think we're seeing it disappear, and I don't think we are, because I think we're now just ushering a new sort of forefront of different shows. Preppers by Nakia Louis coming out, and like that's another like sort of authored show, and that's the really good positives about like I guess the culture around prestige TV. Maybe I also don't really know much. Like I feel like I'm saying all this, but I actually could just be talking mad shit. That's what my belief of prestige is. So
No, I think that's really fair. And I think in the last like 20 years, I'd say, even just the concept of knowing who the showrunner or, like you said, the author's voice is behind a TV series, that's pretty new. Like I was a kid, but I don't remember that, happening in the 90s or early 2000s.
Fundamentally, if like you unpack that TV show, it's like a story about like migration, and equally, I think a lot of like authored prestige sort of TV shows are at heart stories of like points of difference, and inherently are a bit diverse, even though they do have these sort of white anti-hero leads. I mean, we can argue whether Italian people are white or not, but the thing is like, and what it brings up with it is like absolute magic. And I think like the reason it resonates with so many people is because like you can see yourself in all those characters too.
It's at its heart like a comedy as well, which is quite rare in this conversation. Like often this conversation around prestige is very dramatic and serious and stern, whereas Sopranos is a silly show.
Totally. I'm trying to think of other shows that are. I mean, Dear White People, is that a prestige TV show?
I'm not sure.
How are we defining?
What is a prestige TV show? I think you're absolutely right. Like, I feel like there is actually no clear definition, and I think we should make up our own definition. And Enoch, I really liked your like parameters being around authorship and auteurship as opposed to like the actual genre or content of a show, which I think is like a really limiting definition.
What streaming has done is, sort of suddenly, potentially you have a global audience. We, not in Stan's case sort of specifically, but certainly, and I think kind of going back to your first question, Brodie, about, about algorithms and how we sort of, how we kind of calculate who the audience is. I think that, it's a much more, diverse audience that we're trying to speak to as a streamer, and you can kind of make a specific segment of that audience happy. You don't have to make everyone happy, and that in itself, I think, invites more authors to the table because you sort of want creatives that have an ability to speak to different kinds of audiences.
On that note, Ben, I'm curious to know, when it comes to programming and curating what we see on Stan, what are kind of the priorities? What do you hear from subscribers that they want to see more of? Does that factor into your decisions? And what do you personally kind of look for or want to see more of?
I think, like the kind of cop-out answer is like good shows. I think but there is like an element of sometimes you don't know it until you see it. So sometimes it's hard to kind of articulate, we're only looking for like this kind of show with like, set in this kind of world for this kind of demographic, because like things can tickle those boxes and be horrible, and things can, Succession, I didn't necessarily know that I would care particularly much about like the people, the Murdoch family equivalent, but I kind of do. I think I think sort of it is just, I guess, going back to sort of understanding kind of who it is, and there's just multiple segments of audiences with very different tastes. I think sort of Netflix, for example, talk about 2,000 different taste clusters that they base decisions around. I think, I think it's just understanding, kind of where those kind of correlations are between people who watch this also like this kind of thing, and you sort of start to kind of get a sense of actually, this idea or this new show might be very exciting for, that segment of the audience.
Enoch, I'm curious to know, as a TV creator, do you feel like the landscape now offers more or better opportunities to get investment in your work and to have it seen by more people or different people?
I think it's a lot harder. I specifically like speaking from Australian emerging perspectives. I think it can be quite hard um, here for young people to sort of get their strikes across the board and get their own works commissioned, because I think the opportunity is not like what we see in the UK or America, which often manifests itself in the same people doing the same things in the same rooms. Um, uh, but I think there's much more openness, I think, to seeing new diverse stories. I think and there's no shade to them, but I think directors and execs always say in Screen Australia, we want new, we want fresh, we want exciting, but we want it in the same way that we've seen. So it's I think it can be confusing for emerging creatives coming up to find, I guess, the perfect balance between their voice and what execs are saying their audiences want.
Mm-hmm. And what they're saying the audiences want is generally what has done well for competitors in the last, I remember someone tweeting something about in LA at the moment, everyone wants to commission or pour money into is stuff that is, quote, like The White Lotus and Ted Lasso, which are where those two things are alike, I'm not sure, but it makes me kind of nervous about what's to come in the next few years of TV.
Hopefully we're sort of seeing, a bit of a turnover in some of those gatekeepers and, some of those, a bit of, generational shift in who's kind of making those decisions, because I think, as soon as you start to get some different life experiences in the room, suddenly the kind of received wisdom of this kind of show works and this kind of show never works starts to shift, and kind of there's a different understanding of what kind of stories might actually be exciting and appealing. So that's my hope anyway.
Mm-hmm. We are kind of at the end of our conversation today, and I would love to know from each of you what is in your queue or what you've heard about that you're going to be watching soon and why you're excited about them. Enoch, I might start with you.
I don't know, I just keep being suggested a lot of reality. I've been told to watch, my TikTok algorithm keeps popping up with Love Island Australia. So I think I might give that a go. Yeah, it's not good. Does it not compare to the UK version?
I mean, I get a bit of cringe watching Australians on Love Island because the British one is just so great.
There's this guy who's texted half of Sydney apparently that I really want to be part of that conversation, so I might tune in to watch at least Casa Amor.
It's always the big twist in the season is Casa Amor.
Exactly.
Michael, what about you?
Honestly, I'm not even going to lie to you. I feel like the only show that I'm really desperate to start watching is The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. The amount of times I hear the name Erica Jane mentioned and the amount of times I desperately want to know exactly what is going on and also be able to respond. Literally recently I was at the doctor's and I was getting my ears cleaned, which is a bit TMI, but the nurse who was doing it was like, oh my God, you need to watch The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. There was absolutely there was no lead up. There was almost no context. She was like, I'm watching this right now. You just have to watch it. And I was like, that's a sign from the universe as clear as any.
This is a water cooler conversation at her office.
That was quite literally a water cooler conversation. And then also, of course, Enoch, as you were saying, Prep is by Nakia Louie. I'm very excited to watch. And also just to finish Scenes from a Marriage, which I started, but then just like somehow dropped off my radar. But then obviously Oscar Isaac is pulling me back in all directions. So very excited to finish that one off.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk offline about Housewives if you need any tips.
Please text me right now.
At the start of lockdown, I still have not seen a second of Tiger King, for example, just to throw you back to March, April 2020, because I decided with all that free time I would watch all of Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. And I watched 13 years of TV in like 2 months. And nothing else. Ben, what about you? What's on your queue?
Well, I think I'm most excited about the new reality show, which is following Michael Sun's life as he gets his ears cleaned and discusses Real Housewives of Beverly Hills with the attendant. I think that sounds incredible. I will just throw in a couple of promotional messages for Stan. I am very excited about. There's a new season of The Great, Tony McNamara's show, coming out very shortly, and also a new series, Station 11, with Himesh Patel, that's launching in December, that Hiro Murai, who directed all of Atlanta and is sort of worked with Childish Gambino on all his video clips, but so he's directing that. I think that looks really cool.
Did he write that? Is he the showrunner?
The showrunner is Patrick Somerville, who started on The Leftovers, and then he did Maniac for Netflix.
Oh, cool. And, not to make this, again, a Stan promo, but Michael brought up Hacks earlier, and, I mean, my show of the year.
Oh, yeah. Can't wait for more next year, obviously.
Well, thank you all so much. This has been really fun and really insightful as well. I feel like everyone brought like such a specific perspective, and I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining us. There's more Wheeler Centre events on the website, and maybe we'll see you in person soon, I hope.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and around the world.